The Sunday Times is reporting today that more South African National Defence Force members are being investigated. This is for their alleged links to corruption that is related to public protection equipment, that's PPE. It comes months after others appeared in court for irregular contracts worth 273 million rand. We're joined now by senior investigative journalist Thanduxolo Jika. Thanduxolo, good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Firstly, we are almost firmly in what is considered to be a post-COVID-19 world or society, and the scandal that we're talking about is related to what took place under COVID-19, because many of the investigations to try and unravel those secretive contracts are still taking place.
That's correct, Kathy, and good evening to your viewers. What we are seeing now is actually the true kind of picture of what was happening behind closed doors during COVID. This time around, with what we published this Sunday, is something from the Department of Defense, where, there are other individuals who are allegedly trying to stifle these kind of investigations and actually make sure that this kind of information doesn't come out. And of course, it sounds like a number of people are trying to protect, the syndicate, a syndicate of vultures, let me put it that way, that was circling PPE tenders.
It's clear that there was a lot going on behind the scenes, and I want to talk particularly around the story we worked on for today. Companies that won contracts that were told to cede the contracts that they had won to other companies. Sounds complex, but try and simplify it for us, please.
What basically that means, when I can, is that a person such as Mr. Hulisani Ramabulana would go to a company that is registered on the CSD and request the director of that company to actually bid for the tender, and once that happens, they then ask that person to cede or hand over, whatever money that is going to be paid to them should go to somebody else. And in this case, a company called Huyo Consulting, which was owned by Mpho Nevutalu. In a sense, that is some kind of fronting. Somebody else receives a tender, but they don't get the payment. Somebody else gets paid for that tender. And in this investigation, the allegation is that those people who had asked that Company A must give their contract to Company B, which did not bid, which did not do any work, they were claiming that they are providing finance for the company that is bidding. Hence, they were asking that the money should be transferred to them instead of the company that was appointed.
So the companies that won the bids, how did they legitimately explain their role in all of this? Because it seems to me, based on your story, that all they were given was a cut of these monies, but in the end didn't really do any work. But how did they justify doing that in the first place?
Absolutely. Look, one of the guys we spoke to, Simon Shikalange, actually explained it very easy. He said, we got called, we were told to pitch at Eco Park, that's where the central procurement center for SANDF is. And when they got there, they were told, listen, we're going to use your company, but you need to sign these documents and appoint the other company who you're consulting as the one that is going to fund you and supply us. And he said, in the end, in fact, he ended up having to supply and deliver these PPEs. That company didn't do any work. In most cases, the guys are saying, look, I did not have money, but my company was appointed, so I did not have money to go and buy the stock. And I was happy to take a percentage of whatever these guys were offering me. So in a way, they saw it as an opportunity. It's COVID-19, there's lockdown, people don't have much money. They saw it as an opportunity to make a bit of money.
Let's talk about the fact that you also have involved in all of this, the use of fraudulent documentation that was submitted, to the officials, including to the SANDF for vetting processes. What that suggests to me is that either there's incredible weaknesses on the part of whatever processes need to be undertaken for vetting, or that, there's a great deal of dysfunction, just more generally.
Well, Kathy, in this case, what investigators from military police are suspecting, and this is what they were investigating, is that there was collusion, essentially. Officials from the Department of Defense were colluding with these business people, these middlemen from outside, to actually siphon money out of the department. So the checks and balances might be there, but if you've got people who are involved in the process and are colluding with the middlemen or the companies that are being appointed, you are going to find that this kind of scheme will succeed. I mean, we saw this kind of thing in other contracts, PPE contracts, where people used different companies to front for them, and then there were people inside a department that would be assisting in making sure that a certain company gets appointed and that money goes to that certain company.
The other question it raises is one of whether this PPE equipment was ever delivered, and the extent to which, where if it was delivered, there was an incredible inflation rate and markups on the actual costing of the products. And we've seen this, of course, happen in other contracts in other departments across, the country. What were the patterns that you have identified with this particular story?
Look, in this instance, some of the documents that we saw, they were quite careful to stick to the prescribed prices by National Treasury. And remember, this is happening now only in 2021, August and September. And many other people have been exposed for inflating prices. So they were quite meticulous this time around not to raise eyebrows by actually just sticking to the prescribed prices which were determined by National Treasury. But and also in terms of delivery, well, the documents we've got, people signed off that these things were delivered. But what is interesting is the fact that the companies that were appointed were not delivering this equipment. Somebody else was getting paid, meaning that this was a case of fronting and also possible money laundering.
Let's talk accountability now. What do those processes look like? I mean, are we going to see these individuals, I would imagine especially those that are part of the collusion or responsible for the collusion within the SANDF, also being held accountable?
Well, Kathy, it's quite a complex thing, seemingly at SANDF, for people to be held accountable. Yes, last year, because of the SIU's investigation, about 4 or 5 officials were arrested and appeared before the military court regarding a separate PPE tender fraud from 2020. But this time around, there's a bit of frustration from the documents that we got. Investigators feel that their investigations are being stifled and there is no support for these investigations. And interestingly enough, when we asked SANDF, what is the status of the cases, they simply told us that these cases are being handled by SAPS, and they didn't want to give us any further details as to which part of the SAPS is actually dealing with these. So we're not quite sure if there will ever actually be any consequences, and which is probably the reason why this ends up being in the public domain.
I think one of the lessons that more broadly as a country we're going to take from an emergency situation like the COVID-19 pandemic was, of course, the extent to which being in a state of crisis opens up the floodgates for looting, because everything is done under deviation. The transparency is just limited and curtailed, and it leaves a lot of room for people to take advantage of. Do you think that through work like this, there can be a change legislatively around that?
We're hoping that there can be a change, Kathy, because already the National Treasury has, from last year, issue an instruction to government departments regarding the issue of seeding, which is actually when a person wins a contract and then appoints and says, no, actually I pay somebody else for my work and what has been delivered. So Treasury has taken steps, issued an instruction which said no company can actually cede its contract to somebody else who is not a registered financial, an FSP, essentially, or a state institution.
All right. We'll leave it there for tonight. Thanks for your time. A senior investigative journalist with the Sunday Times, Thanduxolo Jika.